talk to you about increasing your probability of winning through understanding the procurement process. This pretty much just reiterates what Bhaskar has already told you, that with 30 years of experience, I've done pretty much everything you can possibly do wrong to a proposal. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of my experience. The only reason I bring up the Virginia bar is that, yes, I'm what my colleagues call a recovering lawyer, but I want you to understand that when you write a proposal, you are writing a government contract. Everything that you write down in that proposal becomes part of a contract, and that's a real good thing to keep in mind whenever you're going through the proposal process. So it's always amazed me that I go into a company and I've got a group of proposal writers that really don't understand how the proposal is going to be evaluated once you submit it. Understanding this process allows you to structure your proposal for maximum evaluation scores. And government procurements are incredibly prescriptive. If you make it easy to evaluate them by giving them what they ask for using their language, you're going to score higher. So let's take a look first at the procurement life cycle. A high-scoring proposal starts well before an RFP is written with your business development activities. This is where you create your relationship with your customer and understand what their needs are. The government writes the RFP guided by the Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 15. Now, the next time you complain about an RFP's inconsistencies or contradictions, remember that an RFP takes at least as much time writing as the proposal does, and it's usually the same kinds of people. You're being pulled off your day job and told you have to help write this RFP for government, for industry. Industry takes over during the proposal process, during the time allotted to write the proposal. And when you're done, the proposal enters the source selection phase, if I hit the right button, where they evaluate your proposal, and then a winner is selected. Now, to increase your probability of winning, you have to understand that source selection phase. By the way, if there are questions or anything, just put them in the chat. We'll take care of them. I don't mind interruptions. I like a more interactive time, and there will be a time when I ask you to. So all this starts with the FAR. You have to have a little understanding here, because from the very founding of our government, all these contracts or positions were awarded according to what's called the spoils system. You used to be able to stand out in line in front of the White House and have an audience with the president and ask him for, I don't know, I want to be the Postmaster General of the Northwest Territory. And he can look at you and say, well, my wife's cousin wanted that position, so it's already taken. So the nepotism and corruption of this process, needless to say, was an issue. But it ultimately led to the creation of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, by far my favorite regulation, no pun intended there. All government regulations begin with the FAR and its vision to deliver the best value product, maintain the public's trust, and fulfill public policy objectives. In the end, it was the FAR that made the spoils system illegal by ensuring that your money is spent in an impartial manner. But that doesn't mean that government acquisitions are unbiased. Far from it. They're strongly biased in the government's favor. With commercial contracts, your parties are allowed, the buyer sellers are allowed to to negotiate on their own. There's no advantage given to the buyer or the seller. They're essentially free to buy from whomever they wish. No one's going to question you if you use your company's money to buy products from your brother-in-law. The market is what regulates the price and the quality. In the government sector, it's the taxpayers' money that's being spent. So, of course, there are laws regulating the purchasing of goods and services for government use. And no surprise, these laws tend to favor the government. Contracts must be competed and awarded under the terms and conditions set out in the FAR. Now, terms and conditions in a government contract are set. There's no negotiation. You essentially have three choices. You can comply. You can prove that you'll comply by the time the contract's awarded, or you can claim an exemption. And it's never a good idea to claim an exemption on a competitive procurement. If you have an exception or an exemption to a contract term, you likely, no, not likely, you will not be awarded the contract. There are too many other groups out there that are willing to do exactly what you're taking an exemption to. Pricing in a proposal must contain all the facts that prudent parties would expect to impact negotiations. Now, that's something that's unheard of in a commercial contract. Can you imagine going into Walmart and saying, I want to see the profit margin that you're getting off this toothbrush? It's just not going to happen. They don't have to disclose anything about the prices. But to make sure that you are truthful to the government, they retain the right to audit the contract at any time, which means you, as a contractor, have to maintain an acceptable inspection system, adding to the cost of doing business with the government. And if all this weren't enough, there's the good old best interest clause. In the commercial sector, contracts are binding for their term. The government, however, has a get out of jail free card called the best interest. They can terminate a contract whenever it's in their best interest to do so. Let's take a closer look at this FAR. It's unwieldy. It's cross-referenced. It's redundant. It's overlapping. It's redundant. Did I already say that? It's confusing. Good point. I asked, sorry, somebody suggested I swap screens, which I thought I was sharing the correct screen. So hold on just a second here.
Just click use slideshow button just in here.
Where would I find that?
It's just in your slideshow link in your PowerPoint, upper left. Yeah, that's it. One last one.
Well, I can do this.
Yeah.
How's that?
Ah, that's good.
Okay. Sorry about that. So anyway, it's a confusing regulation, but that just means my clicker's no longer working. Just means it's a government regulation after all that. So the FAR is what guides the proposal process for our competitive negotiated contracts to ensure that our money is spent without corruption. So here's a quick quiz. You can just put your answers in the chat quickly. I'll give you a couple of minutes at the end. To whom is the FAR applicable? Is it federal employees, federal contractors, procurement officials, or all of the above? I love asking this because it's a trick question. Everybody says all of the above, but
Oh,
that is not the case.
B.
So if somebody said B and C, that's getting closer.
Oh,
But the answer really is the FAR only applies
oh wow.
to procurement officials. So the FAR only applies to contractors when it's specifically referenced in your resulting contract. So if you have a contracting officer that says, hey, you have to do this because it says so in the FAR, unless it's specifically referenced in your contract, you don't have to follow the FAR. The FAR is put together to guide government officials in acquisitions. So I do recommend this excellent book by Krzysztof Milarczyk, Government Contracts in Plain English. It's an excellent reference volume to help you understand government contracts. So it doesn't apply to contractors. Why do we care? Why bother knowing about the FAR? It's one simple reason. Knowing how to RFPs put together, or a request for quotation, or an RFI, or a fair opportunity proposal request, knowing how it's put together and knowing how it's evaluated will increase your probability of winning. Let's take a closer look at this confusing cross-reference, redundant, overlapping government regulation. It comprises 53 parts. Now, the good news is that most of the sections of the FAR don't have any impact on proposals or the competitive acquisition process. For our purposes, the only one that applies to proposal writing is Part 15, competitive negotiation. Now, there are some parts, say Part 16, which guides the fair opportunity proposal response, but it just refers back to Part 15 anyway. Everything that we do with proposals is in alignment with Part 15. So this is the definition of a competitive acquisition. Notice it says Part 15 is intended to minimize the complexity of the solicitation, evaluation, source selection decision. I'm not sure they've accomplished that goal. The requirements are not always clear, and the RFP sections are contradict each other. And the other two parts, the other two phrases you should pay attention to here are an impartial evaluation and award to the best value. So it's the RFP that's the center of the negotiated contract. The government puts together and issues RFPs for the goods and services that it wants to have. And in the RFP, the government attempts to put in writing their requirements in terms of outcomes. That's the goal. And the proposals we prepare in response to these RFPs are highly complex, highly competitive, and completing them is a pressure-filled 30, 60, or 90 days. Let's look at the source selection process. This is what's going to help you structure your proposal. So you've run out of time, you've boxed up your proposal, you've sent it off. I guess I'm showing my age there. Okay, you've run out of time, you've hit save, and you've emailed the proposal in. But notice I didn't say you finished it. I've been doing this for 30 years and I don't think I've ever finished a proposal. You just hit save and send it off. Your proposal goes to a group of evaluators, the Source Selection Evaluation Board. And they've been taken away from their day jobs to come evaluate this proposal. And they may or may not know a whole lot about the topic area. Depending on the size of the proposal, the SSCB could be made up of a group, just a few people evaluating each section, or a team evaluating each section. But either way, there should be more than one or two people evaluating the proposal. You have to understand what the evaluators are looking for to ensure that you're getting maximum scores. According to the FAR, and if you don't remember anything else from this talk, remember this: according to the FAR, the only things required to be documented in the procurement record are strengths, deficiencies, weaknesses, and risks. Those are the only things required for an evaluator to write down. So proposals are evaluated on a spectrum. It can be adjectival, from unacceptable to outstanding, or it can be color-based, red to purple. The terminology may differ slightly from agency to agency, but the process and the result is always the same. So proposals, I'm sure you've heard this, proposals are evaluated, not read. Evaluators have their checklist, they score their sections, and they really don't care too much about the aesthetics or things like one voice or feature benefit charts, one of the proposal myths that is persistent. Government proposals, as I've said, are very prescriptive. With the exception of past performance, the evaluators are not allowed to take any other information into consideration. They can't go off on the internet and Google your company and find out information about your products. Only what's written in the proposal gets scored. They tell you what they want to see, and they don't evaluate anything else. Oops, sorry about that. If they ask for it, you have to put it in the proposal. Flip side of that is if they don't ask for it, it's not scored. You can have the most amazing feature in your solution, but if it's not something they ask for, they don't care. Your best hope in this case for that great feature is that it will get scored as a strength. Now, I used to say evaluators were lazy, and that really doesn't give them full credit, because they really do go in there and try and do the best job they can to evaluate their proposals and come up with a fair recommendation. But they're not motivated to look for answers. And I can tell you from personal experience, when I was in the Air Force as a second lieutenant, they pulled me aside and said, "You're going to go on the evaluation team for the Air Launch Cruise Missile Rotary Launcher Program." I had no idea what they were talking about, but I went in, took my score sheets, evaluated the proposal, and tried to get back to my day job. So Wendy Freeman did something that I've been wanting to do for years, but she beat me to it. She interviewed a number of proposal evaluators to quantify what works and what doesn't work in a proposal. She found that the chairs of the source selection committees or the SSA were pretty much senior contracting officials, your CO, contracting officer, or contracting officer representative. But the people that were really doing the work, the second lieutenants that got pulled off their job, were junior with limited experience in the subject area. So what are they doing? They are not typically won over by complex graphics. They're immune to our heavy focus on wind themes and ghosting because they really don't know what to do with them. They're most interested in filling out their score sheets as quickly as possible, which for you means the easier your proposal is to evaluate, the higher your scores are going to be. So when an SSAEB finishes its evaluation, it recommends to the source selection authority, or if it's in a DoD procurement, it takes a detour to the source selection advisory council, which proposal or proposals they recommend moving forward. So recommendations either from the SSA or from the SSEB go up to the source selection authority. And this recommendation could be for a single winner. It could be a ranked list of the top 2 or 3, depending on the agency and the complexity of the proposal. But either way, the SSA may have advisors to advise them, but either way, at the end of the day, it's the source selection authority that gets to make the decision. They have the final say on the contract award. And the SSA quite likely will never read the final proposal. So to ensure the highest score possible, we need to structure your proposal in a way that the evaluator scores it. Conformance with the proposal instructions is the first checkpoint in the evaluation. Did you follow the instructions found in section L? Is it 12-point Times New Roman font? Do you have 1-inch margins all around? Do you have a full line between each paragraph? Whatever the instructions in section L are. Excuse me. The government might ask questions during the clarification process that allow you to make minor contradictions, right? That's a good one. Make minor corrections, but they might not. They don't have to do that. So don't give them an excuse to eliminate you by not following the instructions. Any RFP can be thrown out for any non-compliance, or I'm sorry, any proposal, and they warn you in the RFP. This is an example from a GSA proposal where they tell you straight out, non-conformance can result in rejection. Don't give them an excuse to eliminate you. So your proposal template conforms to the instructions. Next thing the evaluators will do is a compliance check. Did you address all the requirements as instructed in section L? Did you give them what they asked for? Because a list is not a plan, or a methodology is not a strategy. You have to give it to them in the form they asked for it. And you do this because the evaluators, if they're expecting a strategy and they see a list, probably aren't going to bother reading the list to figure out if there's a strategy in there or not. They may not find what they're looking for. And you need to use the RFP language. So what did Tarzan say when he saw the elephants coming over the hill? Anybody have an elephant joke book when they were a kid? No. Here come the elephants over the hill. What did Tarzan say when he saw the elephants coming over the hill with dark glasses on? Nothing. He didn't recognize them. So your evaluators are Tarzan. If they ask for an elephant, give them an elephant. Don't dress it up and put dark glasses on it to make it look better. Don't call it a pachyderm so you keep from repeating the requirements. If they ask for an elephant, you need to give them an elephant. And repeating the requirements is okay. There's a persistent myth in the proposal universe that you cannot repeat the requirement. And despite what many people think, repeating the requirement is okay. Not only okay, it's good practice. So what do you think? Is this a compliant response? The requirement is provide the necessary training to stay current with appropriate DoD and SOCOM policy. The response is Team X provides all the necessary training to keep our employees and subcontractors current with DoD and US SOCOM policy and guidance. Is this a compliant response? Anybody have any ideas? Okay, nobody knows. Exactly right, Mike. Not surprised that came from you. It is compliant, but not compelling. This terminology from the FAA RFP is pretty typical of language in an RFP. Simply rephrasing or restating without further substantiation can be cause for rejection. So it doesn't say don't do it. It just says if you do it and you don't substantiate it, that's not good enough. So yes, it is compliant, but your rating is unacceptable. Repeating the language doesn't make it bad, it's only insufficient. Repeating the language of the requirements helps evaluators find your compliant response and forms the foundation for a compelling response. So to move your response from responsive to responsive, we need to add the how. This is a description of the details of your solution in response to the requirements. So our compliant response was at a marginal evaluation state. This is our topic sentence, but we all agree it was not sufficient. The better response is, let's start with the customer. Let's show them we understand why this requirement exists. And then you can add a how. In this case, you're using a three-phase approach. But adding the how here only moves your response up to light green at best. You need to start addressing the evaluation criteria directly. Use the RFP words, requirements, and evaluation criteria. So the better response tells them that we've reduced their risk of non-performance, one of the evaluation criteria in section M, and how we've done that, and that we've added also phase 2 training and phase 3 evaluations, which were asked for in the requirement. So we now moved our evaluation score into a pretty good green, acceptable score. Right now you have a proposal teenager. It's pretty smart, and you can pretty much tell what it's going to look like when it's an adult, but it still does stupid things and it still has some blemishes. We want to be compelling. So up to this point, it's been what we call an unsubstantiated claim. You need to show that you can do this where you've done it before and with great success. So you need to add experience where you've been successful in executing these requirements. You need to prove that by adding metrics. And you need to cite the contracts where you've used this solution. So if we look at our improved better response, we've taken what we wrote before and we've added that we've been successful on previous SOCOM contracts where our rating was excellent, resulting in 0 incidents, another metric. So we start with the customer that states our compliance using the RFP language. We described our offering and we backed it up with a citation. It uses the RFP language. It addresses the evaluation criteria, both the risk of non-performance and the risk of increased government oversight. But we're not done. For full credit on an evaluation record, you need to add your strengths. Why strength statements? Because we already know that in the FAR, strengths, deficiencies, weaknesses, and risks are the only things that must be documented. Now, you don't want to call attention to your weaknesses or deficiencies, but the nice thing about strengths is that you can call attention to them in your proposal. Weaknesses, according to the FAR, are a risk of unsuccessful contract performance. Now, you don't want to call attention to your weaknesses, but if you know you have a weakness that the government's aware of, you definitely need to address it by showing mitigation and turning it into at least a neutral, if not a strength. And if you have a deficiency, you shouldn't be bidding this contract anyway. You're done. So that leaves strengths and risk. Unfortunately, the FAR doesn't define either strength or risk, but this is a generally accepted definition of what a risk is. And this is important language for you to use to show areas where you are mitigating risk. So if you mitigate the risk of a disruption of a schedule, that's the terminology you want to use. You want to decrease government oversight. So this is a good example of using words out of the definition and out of the RFP. Now, strength also is not defined in the FAR for some inexplicable reason. But most RFPs will define strength for you. And they all look pretty similar to what's in the DoD source selection guide. A strength is something that's beneficial to the government by having merit or exceeding requirements. If they ask for an elephant, give them an elephant. They're asking for strengths, so call out your strengths. If you state something as a strength, it's more likely to be written into the record, as opposed to having the evaluator decide, well, this looks pretty good, but I don't know if it's really a strength of theirs. Call it a strength. So this is how the DoD evaluates their proposals. And it's consistent with pretty much all the other government agencies. Again, the terminology might vary a little bit, but it's the same spectrum. To reach good, your proposal has to have a thorough approach and understanding, at least one strength, and the risk of unsuccessful performance is low to moderate. However, we don't care about good. Good in the procurement business is a loser. To reach outstanding, your response must have an exceptional approach and understanding, multiple strengths, and a very low risk of unsuccessful performance. Now, I just want to take a quick aside and talk about understanding. Another one of the proposal myths is that you have to have your first paragraph as understanding. Well, I'll tell you, you cannot. show full understanding of the requirements of a RFP in a section, a paragraph or 2 paragraphs. When they talk about understanding in the evaluation sense, they are looking at the response as a whole. For every requirement, do you really understand what's required to be done? So going back, if the proposal must solve the government's program problems, but it also has to give an evaluator a reason to select your solution. So if you think of terms of strengths or as multiple strengths as 3 or more, then you have to have 3 more strengths than you do weaknesses, because strengths and weaknesses essentially cancel each other out. Think of strengths as a +1 and a weakness as a -1. If you have 1 strength and 1 weakness, you've got a 0. So you have to have at least 3 more strengths than weaknesses. And the strengths should always mitigate some kind of risk to the government. Now you know what a strength is. You need to know how to create a strength statement. Remember, a strength statement is something that clearly benefits the government. So to draft your strength statement, you want to identify a government need. You want to describe your actions. And don't be afraid to call it a strength. The more times an evaluator sees the word, the more likely they are to get it written into the record. And then you need to tell them why it's a strength. And to be a strength, it has to benefit the government in some way. So this is an example of a strength statement. And it doesn't meet every requirement, but I think it's very good. And it shows that you can use it in a call out box, or you can replace the traditional feature benefit chart, which is a proposal myth, with strengths and benefits. But they call it a strength, they give the topic area, they use metrics, they give you a solution. I think it's a very well done strength statement that was put in a call out box. So now we have a conforming, compliant, and compelling proposal. How do you get to outstanding? This is the best value trade-off. Far part 2 is definitions, the area where they do not define strength, but they do define best value. Basically, it's the greatest overall benefit to the government. And they use what's called the best value continuum, which is described in FAR part 15. And that just means they get to pick whoever they want to based on price and level of risk. That sounded awfully cynical, didn't it? But being the best value means that you understand your customer's tolerance for risk, and then you price your offering accordingly. Best value compares the risk of accepting your proposal against the price. It allows the government to award to other than the low price if the benefits from that award are deemed to be worth the additional cost. So for all procurements, there's what we call a price threshold or a believability threshold, price realism. And that's a point at which it's no longer believable that you can deliver the goods and services that you've proposed for the price that you've offered. Point A in this exhibit indicates where the price is so low that it's unrealistic, and it introduces a performance risk and will not win an award. I've got a personal example of this. I worked on a proposal where after evaluation, we were #1 technical, #1 management, and #2 cost, and we lost. The company protested. We came back, rewrote the proposal. We were #1 technical, #1 management, and low cost. But the government deemed us to be below the believability range in our price. And so they risk adjusted us outside of the competitive range. So there's an example where you can underprice your proposal. However, point B is within the acceptable range and could receive the award. There's also a risk threshold. And this is a point at which there's too much risk in awarding a contract regardless of the price. Point C indicates an offer where, despite the low cost, the risk is too high and it will not win an award. The somewhat lower risk and same cost award is indicated by point D and is eligible for an award. But that doesn't mean it's going to get the award, because you have to know your customer's level of risk tolerance. For mission critical systems where lives may be at risk, such as a contract for a special forces communication system, the tolerance for risk is very low, which increases the procurement authority's willingness to pay for decreased risk, as indicated here by point E. Now, this is a low risk, high cost solution that most likely will get an award if you're looking for 5 nines of reliability. So it's important to understand your customer and their tolerance for risk in every procurement. So a winning proposal conforms, follows the instructions. It answers each requirement using the RFP language. It describes your offering, tells them how you'll execute your processes, steps, and components, and it emphasizes evaluation criteria. It's compelling. You have to prove it. You have to substantiate performance claims with experience and proof points, and call out your strengths. So follow the instructions, use RFP language, describe your offering, tell them how you'll execute, prove it, and just in case that isn't enough, offer the lowest risk, the least risk at the lowest cost. Bottom line, make your winning proposal easy to evaluate. Comments, questions, comebacks?
Totally. Again, I think that most people, Mike, when I was in shock as much as Mike. I think the principles are so solid. Thank you so much, Lee. Again, questions are coming as we speak, but please do add questions in the chat. I will start with Mike's question. I think that there is a lot of focus on, as you rightly said, persuasive proposals or compelling proposals. So Mike's asking, the quality example, the aesthetics layout, clear, compelling graphics, good writing of the proposal has no impact or value. What's your thoughts on that?
You have to make your proposal look professional. But dressing it up and using fancy things, they don't care. They're looking for a well-written, compelling argument for awarding the proposal. So yes, you have to follow the instructions. Yes, it has to look professional. Yes, you have to use proper grammar. But things like one voice, they really don't expect your management volume to be written by the same person that writes the technical volume. So why do you spend time having somebody go through and make it sound like one person wrote it? Nobody reads it from beginning to end anyway.
I think these comments are so profound because we were told to believe that, okay, proofreader comes in and checks that one language and comes in to do this. This is fascinating. Thank you.
Right.
Rosella asks, in case of functional technological questions, would you explain the how anyway for each features required?
I'm not sure I completely understand.
I think what Rosella is asking that is, okay, if you're working, it's the same example that you gave, like an aircraft maintenance. I mean, like, are you going to go and explain every single features of how you will go and do that? That's the question.
No, that's really not practicable to actually do that for every requirement and every feature. But you want to make your solution clear. So if you give a clear solution, it can answer multiple requirements and tell them how it benefits them, then you're in good shape.
Again, since we have international audience, Lee, I mean, the principles that you shared for FAR and other regulations back in the US, in the
Right.
UK, you can go low, and there is, we call it LPTA, similar, or meet most economically advantageous tender. Any case, I mean, like, is there a possibility that you could still go low, but to explain, okay, this is the reason why we have gone low, this is the benchmarking, just to avoid rejection from the tender?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you back up your price, if you have, I don't know, maybe the most advanced manufacturing system in the world that allows you to undercut anybody else, yeah, that definitely will give you an advantage. The price realism is, I mean, on the chart, it looks like a solid line, but it's really, what's a realistic price for you may not be the same as for somebody else. They do create what they call the competitive range, where they say, if you're below this price, we don't believe you. And if you're above this price, you're definitely kicked out. But if you can substantiate your price, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Again, and it's quite interesting. I mean, like the government contracting in the UK or in the Middle East or in India compared to the US. I mean, like, so Mike also shares his experience where he had a proposal in the central government department. It got rejected because they thought the price was too low and there was no feedback or comeback on that. Is it common? I mean,
No.
the price, no? Okay.
No, it doesn't happen particularly often. Low cost is essentially in best value. What happens after the proposals are evaluated, they're all so close in score that it's going to go to the low cost.
Got it.
So even though they call it best value, unless there's a special circumstances, 9 times out of 10, it's going to go to low cost.
Shortly, Lee. And it's a tactical, thank you for that. Lee, there's a tactical question from Gopi here. There are a few certificates. Is there a possibility that you can get these certificates through the third party? Systems, certification and clearances, YEL 5.4.1, accounting system and audit. It's a technical question, I have no idea. 5.4.2 approved. I think simply what they're saying here is, okay, if you are not compliant, if you don't have the certificate, more or less, can you get the certificate to a third party?
Yeah, if they are required in the RFP and you as a prime don't have it, you can team with another business that does. And that is acceptable.
Mm.
You
Thank
did
you.
skip. You
Mm.
did skip one by Rosella. No, by Jeanette about the small business restricted
Oh, yes,
solicitations.
that's right. That's right. Thank you.
You're right. I've been talking about major unrestricted solicitations. What you'll find in every government RFP is they will tell you exactly what you can and can't do every time. There are definitely differences for small business restricted solutions. As Bhaskar mentioned, there's low price, technically acceptable, LPTA coming out. The fair opportunity responses are slightly different because you've already written the bulk of your proposal, supposedly. Somehow they keep asking for it again in the task orders. But so, yeah, you need to pay attention to what kind of proposal or what kind of contract they're letting. But the RP is going to tell you.
Totally. Again, thank you, Lee, for that. And again, we have the same issues here in the UK. I mean, like on one end, people, especially the government here, so they are saying we are pro small business. We want more small business in the supply chain. But the questionnaire is so complex that a small business can never write it. It's much more driven with all the policies, procedures, etc. That's pretty much geared for big companies. So that's it. So just in summary, Lee, this is a question from Gopi, and that's kind of summarizes it. So, in your opinion, how to win the federal RFP proposal? I know you had it at the last slide, which kind of nicely summarized it. Just as the last word, Lee, how to win a federal RFP proposal? I think that was the super line that you had it at the end.
Yep.
That's it. This is the answer. Winning proposal is easy to evaluate. So thank you, Lee. Thank you for that. So thank you for staying. So it's time for the Scribble quiz. Stay close to the chat. 3 questions from the talk. Whoever answers, get a learning. So let me start with the very basics. What does FAR stand for?
Federal Acquisition.
No, Lee. You know, this is for the attendees. No.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
No, it's okay. Okay, we'll also consider you part of the prize. So yes, it's Federal Acquisition Regulation. So as Lee mentioned, part of the federal FAR, there are 53 parts. He mentioned there is one part which is by far the most important, and there is a subpart which also refers to that main part. What are these 2 parts and what's their name? Yes, Richard, we will share the slides in the next 24 hours. Yeah. Slide 15. Sorry, part 15 is correct. Mike, any name? Do you know the name? And what's the other part? Space. Okay, Lee, would you like to say what's the name of part 15?
Competitive negotiations.
Competitive negotiation, that's the one. And the part 16 is fair opportunity, something like that, isn't it? Proposal reference. So it's related to part 15. So
just a little clarification there. Part 16 really involves your IDIQ contracts. So the IDIQ contract itself is written and competed under Part 15. All the task orders under that already awarded contract are governed by Part 16. So your fair opportunity proposal request, which is really an IDIQ task order, comes under Part 16.
Nice. Thank you, Lee. And last 2 questions before we close. So while talking, Lee mentioned you as a proposal professional or a tendering person respond to all instruction in which section? It's an alphabet. Michael, that's good. Richard, nice.
I'm sorry, yes, IDIQ is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity.
Yes, nice. Okay. So again, there were few important pointers which I note down, and one of the thing is proposals are blank, not blank. What's the thing? Proposals are dash, not dash. Fill in the blanks. Yeah, very similar. Nice, Mike. That's it. That was super. I think that was super powerful. Similarly, evaluators are not motivated to look for what? The blank. Evaluators are not motivated to look for close. Evaluators are not motivated to look for answers because it's it goes again. These are nuggets, but it's super powerful. Again, so the final point here is there was a story that Lee said talking about evaluators. What was the character that he connected evaluators to? Mike, you are a super listener. Thank you. And that's it. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you for participating. Lee, it was absolutely brilliant. Again, to look at it from the source selection, Tarzan with dark glasses. Please don't do that. So it was fascinating, and I'm sure listeners and the people who will be watching this recording, which I think 200 plus later on, they'll thoroughly enjoy. Thank you for joining. And as I mentioned, I'll be in the US for the next 10 days. It's a short break, but when I'm back, we will be back with Jody Alves. So at 14th of October, why I teach what I teach and how my students teach me. That's a nice topic. I'll see you on the 14th. Thank you again, Lee. And
thank you everyone for your attention. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Don't hesitate to contact me.
Totally. Thank you all. Thank you so much.